It's so exciting to talk to you all and to be a part of Give Grand Day, our first ever New Mexico Gives Day, which will be happening on May 6th. And it's really great to be with such an amazing group of dedicated fundraising and social profit leaders and individuals like yourself here today. You may have seen some information about my background, but just the real quick intro on me is that in January I started my 30th year in fundraising, and I just love asking for money. And so I'm really excited about imparting whatever wisdom and knowledge and inspiration and how to look at impact and outcomes so that you too can actually love fundraising, and I know so many of you already do. And how to then not only love fundraising, but be such an inspiration and such a role model that you're able to bring those same qualities to your board and your volunteers and your stakeholders. So in the conversation that we're going to be having today, I'll be the first hour, but I'll end a little bit before the hour so that you can take a quick break, and then Lisa will be the second hour. And the way that we've structured this is that what I'm talking about is how impact brings on funders, and how being able to state your impact and outcomes in such a way that has people want to contribute, foundations, corporations, and then Lisa will then follow that up with, then how do you recognize your contributors in a way that keeps them on board forever and wants them to continue to fund or contribute to your causes well into the future? Because what we all know is that it takes so much to bring on contributors, and in all marketing things that we do, we always have to be looking for new contributors, but it takes so much less money to keep those contributors happy and to keep them happy month after month, year after year. So what I've given you all is an annual report from Acción, and I hope that this serves kind of as a model of what we're going to be talking about and how impact and outcome and how to bring inspiration into what you do. And you'll see in the middle there, it's the story about Ernest Lee in Colorado. You'll see the agenda that we're going to be working from. And then you'll also see some things that we put out on our website. For instance, an Acción finance restaurant and food-based businesses and healthcare businesses in our state, just as a way to publicize our clients. And then you've gotten the Valentine's postcard. And so Lisa will be talking about this, but how to make sure that you recognize everybody who contributes at least 7 times before making the next invitation to contribute. And this Valentine card with a photo from one of our clients in Phoenix is an example of how to measure and provide outcomes and impact in a way that we hope is inspirational. So in looking at your agenda, I want to kind of start things out too by just saying, and even though I've been fundraising for 30 years, I'm not an expert in this portion of things. And so part of putting this together and why I like to do workshops I've never done before in my fundraising training, and I actually have goals every year about how many people I want to train in fundraising, and to kind of get across that message of how you love, how you really can love fundraising and how philanthropy is so much fun. But I really enjoy doing these kinds of workshops that I've never done before, which is this subject matter today. And so much about how we are going to be looking at impact and outcomes, and then telling the stories that inspire people to contribute because of those impact and outcomes is something that I'm just learning as to how we do that online. And as we know, Give Grand Day is very much of an online social media, given 24 hours, do it on the website, make a difference just by looking at the little portfolio that we provide as social profit organizations, so that people are inspired to contribute in a flash. It's kind of like when you see something like a magazine that looks really titillating, and you're waiting at the grocery store and you just buy that magazine. It's impulse. So how can we create that kind of message? And I'm learning with you. But in doing that, it comes to the first section of the agenda, which is what I've learned in telling our stories with impact and inspiration. So what I know in doing this over 30 years, and you may have heard that I was talking about social profits rather than nonprofits, is this first information, this first little bullet about giving personally. And everything that I know and love about fundraising, I got through a mentorship that I had early on in my fundraising career with Lynn, who's written a book called The Soul of Money, which is an amazing book, and she's an amazing speaker. And she's here at the Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe twice a year. And this book and what she speaks about is how noble it is to be a fundraiser, and how the greatest movements on the planet, the civil rights movement, Gandhi's movement, Susan B. Anthony, women having the right to vote, Mother Teresa and building all of the charities, all of those happened because those people were the most amazing fundraisers on the planet. Martin Luther King was not able to have those kinds of marches and get people in buses to where they needed to go unless he was able to raise money. Money is what is needed for every good cause that we want to make a profound difference with. And what she also taught me is that she didn't want to be a part of something that was a not-for or non-organization, where she sees our organizations that are also often called not-for-government or nonprofit, is that we're social profit organizations. We're about creating a social, human, animal capital that transforms our world and transforms our community and transforms people and the environment and individuals and animals one at a time. And that's what we make happen in our social profit organizations. If we didn't have a profit, then we wouldn't be good financial stewards, and we wouldn't want to contribute or invite others to contribute to our organizations. So one of the things I learned early on from her 30 years ago when I was at a non-social profit organization in San Francisco is that if you're going to be a fundraiser for your organization, you have to give personally yourself. And not only to give yourself, but to give in a way that's significant for you. And what I mean by significant is different for each and every person. When I moved back from the Bay Area where I started my fundraising career and moved back here to Albuquerque, my hometown, I started working at the University of New Mexico Libraries, and I was their first director of development. And when I took the tour and was thinking about fundraising for the libraries, and I talked to my mom who had gotten her PhD at the University of New Mexico, and I said, how do you fundraise for libraries? That just seems so boring. And she said, Lynn, the libraries are the heart and soul of the university. If you don't have good libraries, you don't have a good university. Faculty research doesn't happen. Students can't get what they need. And she knew that from being a student at UNM, and she knew how important the libraries were. And it had me think back to when I was 5 years old and we lived in Santa Fe, and my mom took me to get my first library card. And when you're 5, there's not often that you feel very powerful. You know, your parents are dragging you around and you're doing whatever they're doing, and you don't have power at the age of 5. But I knew when I got my first library card and that I could check out books for free, that I had power. And so it brings you back, when you give personally and you give in a way that's significant, it kind of changes your molecules. And my husband and I made, with our daughter Rachel, who was 2 at the time, she's now 22, we made our first contribution. I knew that in order to really be able to invite others to contribute significantly, I had to see that there was a project that I could contribute to significantly and that my family could be a part of. And we contributed $2,500 toward naming one of the bookcases in the West Wing of Zimmerman Library after my grandparents, Colonel William and Frances Salmon. That was a $2,500 contribution, and it was kind of mind-altering to us. We knew that we could afford our groceries and go on vacations and do all of that, but it was a really significant gift for us. And to have little Rachel and her squirrel at 2, sign the pledge card. But what was important for us, if you all have ever been to the Salmon Raspberry Ranch in northern New Mexico, is that we wanted to honor my grandparents who have, because of his entrepreneurial spirit, did so much for my family and my cousins, our whole family. And so this bookcase was filled with books that the library really needed, with Southwest Commerce books, books on business, books on agriculture, all sorts of things that the library and our students needed. And what we made sure is we put kind of a leather on them that was raspberry colored leather. And inside the books was a little book plate that recognized Colonel William and Frances Salmon. And there was a tin plate at that bookcase, and it's still there. It's there in perpetuity. And so in making that kind of contribution, I could ask others to contribute $100,000 and $1 million to the libraries. And I've seen that in every job since then, in Bosque School and now at Acción, which is where I'll be until I can't draw another breath. But each of those places, I've contributed significantly and have put my heart and soul into that in a way that gives me the chance to be on the pier with anybody, the bank presidents, the major philanthropists, even for some of you who do gifts with federal agencies, with federal organizations. Because what we're always doing when we're inviting institutions, individuals, foundations, and corporations to give, we're always asking people, like you and I. We're never in front of a building saying, will you give me money, please? We're inside that building, and we're building relationships with other people like us. And we're sharing passions, and we're creating that kind of matchmaking that has them want to contribute to the causes that we care so much about. So number one, in creating these messages that look at outcomes and create the kind of inspiration that you need, look at contributing yourself. And then in contributing yourself, look toward your own giving and what gauges your needs and desires. So oftentimes when I've come into an organization like Acción, what I noticed when I made my contribution, and I made a couple, one before I came to Acción and one afterward, and I noticed that our letters were exactly the same. And that each year, the letters, they would just change one paragraph about how many new loans and how much was lent, from one year to the next. But otherwise, it was exactly the same. And there wasn't a client story in the letter. So it was, thank you for your contribution to Acción. And, some nice things that had happened with some of the statistics, the outcomes, which I care about, and we'll talk about that. But nothing inspiring, like, how did we make a difference in another person's lives? And what was that trickle effect? And then what I also noticed is that they didn't have any naming opportunities that were permanent. So they had created societies of 10,000 to 24,000. And that was the only one. And that that there was quite a large number of people who had contributed 50,000 and more. And so they would have, something they put in the paper and a little poster that each year had those $10,000 through $25,000 contributors, which they then would take down the next year. So being somebody who loves naming opportunities, and I think because my grandfather, being Jewish and having so many of his family members perish in the Holocaust, when he became an entrepreneur and was able to own land, which he was never able to do, being Jewish in Russia, there was something about contributing in a way that had his name live on in perpetuity. So even with those family members who were no longer with us, the Salmon family name would always be there in institutions that he cared about. So we created plaques that were permanent plaques. And in building our new building in the Sawmill area, we actually, because this one plaque for 50,000 and over contributors, which is there in perpetuity, was so heavy that it would have fallen off the wall of our Galleria Plaza office, because those are such thin walls. We made sure in building our new building that we had sturdy walls where we exactly knew where those mosaic tile plaques were going to go that had the names of our 50,000 and over contributors. So be thinking of the things that you care about, and if naming is or not, or how you like to be thanked, that you want to see some outcomes and statistics, of course, but you also want the inspiration. So next, when we're looking at communicating impact, what I've seen, and especially since 2008, when the recession began, is that more and more funders, individuals, foundations, and corporations, and I'll even talk about public funding too, because again, you're talking to individuals, even when you're getting that grant from Economic Development Administration or from the Department of Treasury. You're always building relationships. And of course, what we want more and more, even if it's an organization that works primarily with children or works only with artists and getting them going, what funders want to see is what is the economic impact to what we're doing. And those kind of outcomes are really important. And I'm going to give you a distinction that I learned through the Albuquerque Academy Community Builders program about the difference between upstream and downstream organization. Upstream organizations are often very impact-driven and outcome-driven. They're organizations that are being proactive. They're about creating systemic change in the lives of everybody on our planet. They're about alleviating poverty. They're about providing education. The kinds of organizations that are examples of upstream organizations are community development financial institutions like Acción or West. And Anna's in the back here from West. Educational institutions like the APS Foundation with Phil and Shannon, C&M with Lisa, UNM, those kinds of educational institutions that provide that generational empowerment. Advocacy organizations, organizations that give us the kind of information that we need. And I know a number of you are here from advocacy organizations. You're all about measuring outcomes and impact and how that makes a difference in economic development. And that's the big shift that I've seen, is that what funders want to know, even if you're a downstream organization, which are those organizations that are very reactive. There are food banks. There are homeless shelters. There are organizations, and I know All Faiths is here in the group, organizations that take children like All Faiths and ensures that they're out of those abusive situations ASAP to make a difference in their lives. Food banks, as I said, and homeless shelters, people who need food immediately or they will starve. People who need shelter because it has to happen, those emergency shelters, or people could freeze right out on the streets. So those organizations are so important as well. But what those organizations need to do more of is demonstrating some of these things that we'll be talking about in terms of upstream kinds of results. And what us upstream organizations always need to do more of is creating those heartwarming stories that are so much at the base of organizations that deal with abused children, or who are feeding people who wouldn't have been fed otherwise, children who wouldn't have their backpacks of food over the summer were it not for some of the organizations that you all work with. Us upstream organizations, we need to create more inspiration around our stories so that when you read our annual reports or go online, a tear comes to your eyes. Because it's both of those elements, the outcomes and the impact and the inspiration that motivates people to contribute. And again, people being everybody that we work with as individuals, foundations, and corporations. So what I'm seeing a lot of, and some of the theme of these upstream results, is that organizations, funders, want to know how you're creating economic development. And they want to do that with art organizations. How are you employing people? How are you creating more tax incentives? How are you bringing people into the community? Arts organizations, you all, this individual, Art Spiegel, he passed away about 10 years ago, but he was Mr. Philanthropy here in Albuquerque in New Mexico. And he was also Mr. Symphony. And he was a huge fundraiser for the symphony. And he was of the Spiegel family, the Spiegel catalog family in Chicago. He was, we would call each other pioneering Jews because his family was the only one to really leave Chicago or the East Coast, and he moved all the way to Albuquerque and was an investor and was a very successful philanthropist and investor. And what he would talk to people when he would invite people and companies and foundations to contribute to the symphony, he would say, we cannot create more economic development in Albuquerque and in New Mexico. We cannot create more jobs unless we have a world-class symphony. We need to have the kind of community where the cultures are well valued and where we are seen as a kind of the creative class, which we know now about Albuquerque being one of the most creative cities in the United States, and Santa Fe, so much that happens with the artistic communities, and what that means in terms of economic development by tourism as well. That we are able to create generational empowerment. And what I mean by that is even an organization which is downstream, like All Faiths, when we save one of those children and they're placed in a family where they are no longer in a model of abuse, we have created that kind of breakthrough, that break in transformation, where they don't have to follow some of the same patterns that were happening in their family before they were taken out of that situation. And that kind of economic development and the kind of thing where you do take somebody out of a dangerous situation and help them create new models is the kind of generational empowerment that a lot of our organizations are a part of. West is very much an organization that does that. And helping with technical assistance and creating new jobs. They are about alleviating and working with people who are considered low to moderate income, all these labels that we have to present to our funders who are corporations and foundations. All of those kinds of elements, they work with those kinds of individuals so that they are no longer low to moderate income. They have a viable business where they can create the kind of self-sufficiency they need for their family and for those generations of family members. Because what we know is in education is that when a family is financially viable, and those of you who work with art organizations and are helping those artists become viable, or you're working in literacy and helping those families learn to read and be more educated, what the research shows is that when your family is economically, financially viable, your children are so much more likely to be able to read by the 3rd grade. That pivotal point, where if they can read by the 3rd grade, they're often so much more likely to then finish high school and then to go on to post-secondary education and be able to be in the kind of jobs that are needed by some of the companies that we want to attract into this state. Job creation. All of us create jobs. So our nonprofit, when we get into our nonprofit charity mentality, that's when we think that, because we're a nonprofit, we've got our hand out and we're not creating jobs like a for-profit organization. It's one of the reasons, actually, that Axion 2 years ago said we have to provide loans for nonprofits. Those of you who have created your nonprofits and those who created the nonprofits or social profits you work for, they're entrepreneurs just as much as the people who create for-profit companies. And they're creating jobs, and they're creating tax revenues, and they're creating a return on people's investments through their contributions. So we create just among our organizations, and we have one of the strongest social profit sectors because we are a pioneering state, we're not relying on the government. We're making sure that we're helping to alleviate what's happening and that we see needs to be fixed and where we're creating solutions here in New Mexico. Asset building, Habitat for Humanity. I know there is somebody here from Habitat for Humanity. That is so much an upstream kind of asset building organization. When somebody can get into their own home and create that kind of asset for themselves, then they can borrow money to buy a car that they need for their business, or be able to make sure that they can take out a loan so the children are educated. Those are the kinds of things that can happen when you're building your assets. Something that Axion actually looks at, which I don't have here, which is about asset building, is we look at credit scores from one loan to the next. And 60% of our clients increase their credit score from one loan to the next. That means that their credit score, by being higher, they can create more assets for themselves by buying homes, and again, create more economic empowerment. We've talked about tax revenue, workforce development. You may not think of these organizations as creating better workforces, but Cachette, I know Cachette is here. Cachette Kelsey, yay. National Dance Institute, one of the ways that they express themselves around outcomes, around workforce development, is that they talk about how through the discipline that the children who are involved in their programs and young adults who are involved in their programs, the discipline that it takes to be a dancer and the discipline that it takes to be at the trainings, to make sure that every week they're there, every day they're there, whatever that takes, to memorize their dance steps, to do everything that they need to do to have a successful performance, all of that, that kind of work that happens for them, the discipline, the steadiness, the tenacity, all of that makes for a better workforce, a better person who can go then into a job and get the work done because they do have that kind of discipline. And they do provide those two organizations those kinds of statistics which you wouldn't necessarily think from organizations that are about dancing. But what they've been forced to look at really by their funders, and it's an important thing, is so how does dance really benefit us economically? How does having kids dance support what we're trying to achieve in this state? And they've seen and have been able to culminate some really good statistics around how many of those children do graduate from high school, go on to post-secondary education, and have the skills that they need to be better workers or to start their own organizations and to be entrepreneurs. Educational standing. So literacy volunteers of Santa Fe who are here and make a huge difference in making sure that education supports what we do. C&M, again, they are so much about workforce development, and you've probably seen the advertising that's been happening for C&M with everybody in their different, outfits or uniforms in terms of what they do in life, the kinds of jobs that they're now able to sustain for themselves because of the work that they've done and the education that they've received. The APS Foundation, I know you all are always working toward how can we better our educational standing, again, to attract new businesses into town who can see their children being part of those schools and being able to be well educated. Self-sufficiency. Organizations like Cornucopia, Carrie Tingley, healthcare organizations, as well as advocacy organizations, create this kind of self-sufficiency where people are, through better health, through asset building, through advocacy, through supporting getting up on their feet and providing a hand up. Clinic Kids as well with Sherry, taking those dire situations that are so downstream, but giving people the tools they need and the advocacy and support to help them move to that next level, again, creates that self-sufficiency in people that allows them to move forward. And then training and technical assistance. PEEC, I noticed, was here. Watermelon Mountain, Circles. These are all organizations that educate the public about what's happening. Some of these are organizations about, Circles I actually contribute to, Animal Humane. Those are organizations, almost all of us have had a pet or love animals. And for myself, I contribute to Circles because I used to ride horses and show competitively hunter-jumper. And to think, to be educated and to hear about, especially during this economic downturn, how many animals have suffered because of this, where their owners just can't feed them any longer, can't take care of them, but that there are organizations that can bring them literally back to life and give them good homes and give that adoption opportunity. Those are the kinds of things that we always need in this kind of Zen way. How do we have ourselves feel better? By having a pet who loves us. And as most of us have talked about, our spouses are great, but our animals, they love us unconditionally. And that is so important. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to keep expressing. So then how to look at those kinds of outcomes that we're measuring about how we make a difference in workforce development. How do we make a difference in self-sufficiency and the numbers that go around that? Because I can already tell there's a little bit of glazing over. And that's what happens. As you talk about some of these outcomes, which funders always want, and we've all had our conversations with funders, and it's like, okay, really, what more can I give you statistically? And when we were doing presentations in front of funders, if you give them too many statistics, you notice they'll glaze over. So now we get into the inspiring part. And in talking about communicating inspiration, that's when we really need, with our upstream organizations and our downstream organizations, to create tales of warmth and empowerment, to have those testimonies. And for instance, for every statistic that I have around Acción and our lending, I have a story. So when I talk about with bankers especially, who of course would not touch an entrepreneur who has a 0 credit score. We love clients and entrepreneurs with 0 credit score, because what that means is they've never had any debt. And oftentimes that happens with people who have come here from other countries. And this is actually a story about Fernand Lumamu, who came from the Congo after the Congo Civil War. His whole family was killed in the Congo Civil War. And he was in a Benin, Africa refugee camp for 10 years, just trying to get to the United States, trying to live what he thought could be an American dream, and so tenaciously trying to figure out how to keep his life in order. At the age of 43, when that all happened, he wasn't actually placed in the United States until 10 years later when he was 53. And he went from the jungles of the Congo to Tucson through the International Refugee Committee, the Sonoran Desert. He spoke predominantly French. This was about 3 years ago when he came in contact with Acción. So here he was, a farmer by trade, only spoke French for the most part. You couldn't, Catholic Charities couldn't place him at Walmart or some big box store in order to employ him. But because he'd been a farmer and because they knew about Acción, they thought maybe he could start, and he thought maybe he could start a landscaping business. So his first loan was for $200. It bought him a shovel, a rake, and bus tokens. And he's, explained this story to me, and we've gotten to be friends over the years. And he would get off of the bus in different neighborhoods in Tucson, and he would knock on the door in this halting English with a shovel and his rake, literally, that he took on the bus. He would ask for work. He paid off that first $200 loan before the 5-month term. He's now had 7 loans with Axion. He has 3 businesses, not only the landscaping business where he employs 3 other people from Catholic charities that he came to the United States with, but he also has a scrap metal business. And he now, because of his 7th loan, he has a little plot of land where he's been able to lease through this loan. And he's growing produce, and he's selling that at the farmer's market in Tucson. He recently sent a photo of his house, which to most of us would look like a shack. But it's a house that he built on this plot of land with his 2 trucks, both through Axion loans. One of them has on the back of the window, "Call Axion for a loan." Literally, it does. And our phone number, our 800 number. And he's gone from a 0 credit score. I don't usually get teared up by credit scores, but he's gone from a 0 credit score to a 700 credit score. And each and every year, he's been contributing to Axion, $20 a year, which is so meaningful and significant for him. So at an event that I saw him at in Tucson a couple of years ago, he was wearing this nice camel jacket. When he's been here, we've had him speak in Albuquerque. When I see him, he's looked nice, but kind of a mishmash of Catholic charity clothes, kind of a weird jacket and a shirt. He doesn't know what it says on the front of it, and that kind of thing. But he was in this beautiful camel-colored jacket, and he had a gold tie and a beret. And I said, "Wow, Fernand, you look so dapper." And he said, "Well, Lynn, when you met me, I was a poor man. But now because of Axion, I'm a rich man." And he contributed $200 that year back to Axion. So those are the kind of stories when you tell us statistics that you can then tell a story. When people say, "How can you provide a loan of 200 or so and have it make a difference?" Well, one of our clients in Las Cruces, who was at a battered women's shelter, whose name I can't tell you because she was in a battered women's shelter with her children and got financial literacy training through Axion. And she decided when she was able to move out and she felt safe with her children, and they'd set her up in an apartment through La Casa, and she had a job at a grocery store, someplace where, again, she felt safe. But she wanted to make just a little bit of supplemental income. And so she took out a loan for $348. And so that allowed her to buy the makeup that she needed to buy so she could be a Mary Kay representative. She paid that loan off early and is now making that supplemental income and is doing really well in her Mary Kay job. That's how a small loan can make a difference. How can our almost $300,000 loans make a difference? If you've ever been to Bosque Brewery here in Albuquerque, that's owned by 5 young men. 4 of them have families. In each of their families, they not only have their own biological children, but they have also children that they've adopted, many from Africa. And so what they do is they give a percentage of their proceeds back so that they can make a difference for other families who are adopting kids from Africa. And so that first $100,000 line of credit and now a $300,000 line of credit that's growing their business not only helps them with their altruistic and their own family endeavors and passions, but they've also gone from having 6 jobs to now, when they open their Nob Hill site, 26 jobs that they've helped create in a period of about 18 months that they've owned this business. Where they didn't know how to make beer. Sometimes we hear that after we provide the loan. But they had the cash flow, the collateral, the credit score, but mostly with what we lead with, character. So we knew that they were a good loan, and they have been. So that also points to some of the stories that I've been telling you. Get to know your constituency. Who are the people, the animals, the environment? Who are you serving, and what kind of difference are you making in their lives? And get to know them. Every time we have a staff meeting, we try to have a client speaker. Our board meetings always start out with a client speaker. Now, one of our lending officers could be the ones to talk to them and kind of prepare them. I always make sure I'm the one to do that. One, because it inspires me. It's the juice that has me continue to contribute. But 2, it's so important for them to know that our board, our staff, all of us give back to Axion. And when they hear that strangers, like how you would talk to your constituencies, if they heard that strangers, complete strangers, people that don't know them, your board, your staff, contribute toward their success, they too can think about giving. And that's the 3rd point about after get to know your constituency. The 4th, invite your clients to contribute. We're one of the few community development financial institutions that does that. And the reason we often don't think about inviting our clients to contribute is because we think of them as the labels that we have to give our funders. They're low to moderate income, they're emerging, they're minority, whatever it is, we judge them by how much money we think they have or don't have. And I truly believe, and I've learned this through Lynn Twist, is that that's an insult. We should give everybody the chance to contribute back to our organizations if we've served them. And it's so empowering. Jason Burns started with us when he was 21 with an $8,000 loan. He just turned 30. We've now just recognized him for contributing $10,000 to Axion. He has 3 businesses, 3 or 4 loans with Axion, a son, he got married, he got his MBA. And what he says is that, you all taught me what it means to be an entrepreneur. I always, it's such a French word, it's so cool, it makes you stand up a little bit taller when somebody calls you an entrepreneur versus a small business owner. But he said the other thing that you've taught me is what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be a philanthropist, what it means to be a gentleman. And those are all the things that I've learned through my interactions and through contributing back to Axion. I know I'm providing support for other entrepreneurs just like me. And your clients will want that opportunity too. We want to be more than whatever label we are. To be labeled a philanthropist, you don't have to be a Rockefeller or a Ford to be a philanthropist. It can be that you're contributing $5 or $50. It's whatever is significant for you. That makes you a philanthropist. And those are some of the things that have really supported our funders. We're walking the talk. Over 200 of your clients contribute back to Axion? That's unheard of. That's incredible. That has them see, and our board and our staff, that has them see that we're just not always out there asking. We're walking the talk. We're doing it ourselves. We're contributing to our organization. And that is very, very powerful for funders. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of a chance to kind of practice what you've been hearing. And if you'll just take a partner and 2 of you kind of get together, we're going to give you the chance to actually talk about your organization from an outcome and an inspiration perspective. And you're only going to get a minute.
We work for the same organization, which is Enlace Comunitario. So first, for impact, she talked about the number of children that we serve. But where she really got me and inspired me was in the inspiration piece, because she talked about how she was really touched by our efforts around the holidays to collect gifts for the children that we serve, and that she was particularly moved by, we always ask the moms what kinds of gifts they'd like us to try to collect for their children, and one mom said underwear, which is, I'm going to cry. Something so basic, and it touched Jessica and it touched me, and we were able to provide that for the client and her family. But it kind of got to the core, because I am always saying, like, oh, and we provide, that falls under our case management. And we said we provide case management to this many people, but she kind of got rid of the jargon and talked about like an instance of case management.
Evelyn shared with me about the organization she works with, an organ transplant awareness program. The most powerful thing she said to me was, we have so many people on the waiting list, we only have so many organs that are donated, and I received one, and I'm waiting for one. So she made it very personal. And she let me know she'd already benefited, so the program had credibility, and she identified the need on a personal level. So it was really powerful. Her passion was there, understated. But what she shared brought it home. So.
But this is a chance too, as we go into, it's kind of a perfect segue into Lisa's talk about recognition and how to make sure that in recognizing, you're always talking about the impact and the inspiration, and a way for you to see that, but a way for to be more involved. As we all know, small business owners, this is my plug for Axion, we all know small business owners, and many of you are business owners, and that you are the creator, you are the executive directors of the organizations that you work for. And so if you need a little bit of financing, this is a place where you may see that not only will you get that loan check, but a community of support. And that is so much what we provide as well.